What Really Happened with your host, Mike Rivero. The history the government hopes you never learn. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It is Friday, February 8th, 2019. Thank goodness it's Friday. Thank goodness it's Friday. And we've got a lot of stuff to talk about today. It's been a very busy news day, and the phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. Mike is in our control room, ready to answer the phone, put you on the air with your comments and questions. And, of course, this being Friday, the lovely Lady Claire will be joining us in hour number 3 with her unique perspective on the world. So let's get right on into it, and I'm going to start with Venezuela. Elliot Abrams, in a State Department press briefing just yesterday, said that the time for dialogue with Maduro has long passed. Those are fighting words. He's basically saying, we're not interested in talking with them. And the U.S. is now advising other countries to deal with Juan Guaido, the self-appointed interim president recognized by Washington. They're not even trying to hide the fact that this is another U.S.-backed coup d'etat. So, interestingly enough, story that came out of Russia today. Mike Pompeo is out there saying that America is obligated to fight Hezbollah in Venezuela to save duly elected Guaido. Now that's the new spin, that you know, the election was stolen from Guaido. He didn't even run. Anyway, Pompeo said Cuba was already occupying Venezuela, misunderstood how democracy works, and claimed Iran had a president in the country. Boy, they're just piling them all on in there. Iran's in Venezuela. We've got to deal with that. Cuba's in Venezuela. We've got to deal with that. You know, Maduro has a Death Star. And they're just laying it on with a trowel here. Another story, this one from Information Clearinghouse. And they're chastising Reuters for an article that said U.S., Canada, and Latin American governments claim Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro stole his second-term election in May of last year. They have therefore recognized an opposition legislator, Juan Guaido, as Venezuela's interim president. Now, again, they're saying Maduro stole the election from Guaido. It doesn't make sense. Guaido didn't run in the 2018 presidential election. Now, Henry Falcone was the opposition politician who finished a very distant second in that election. Nobody has shown or even attempted to show that any votes, or never mind millions of votes, were stolen from Falcone. In Venezuela's electoral system, a very small amount of ballot stuffing is detectable in any contested election. That's why in 2012, Jimmy Carter said the electoral system was the best in the world. It requires fingerprints for voter ID. It's very secure, unlike the U.S. system here. But, I mean, that's the new spin. Oh, that evil Maduro. He stole the election from Guaido. That's the big lie. Guaido didn't even run, didn't even have a campaign. Now, yesterday there was a story about a big stink being raised because Maduro's military had blocked a key bridge across the border into Colombia. And the spin was that, oh my goodness, he's blocking humanitarian aid being sent in by the U.S. to the opposition. And, of course, given that plane load of weaponry that was intercepted by Venezuelan authorities, I'm sure that Maduro's concerned that the humanitarian aid is actually aid for the opposition to arm it. And does it really make sense that at the same time the United States is imposing crushing economic sanctions on Venezuela, following a plan apparently by John Bolton to literally starve the Venezuelan people into submission, that the U.S. would send any humanitarian aid in at all? So Maduro was right to block that bridge, because that is a conduit through which weapons are going to be sent into his country to arm the opposition. I mean, this is right out there in your face here. Blacklisted News has an article saying that the opposition in Venezuela will probably use access to that frozen money because the sanctions are against Maduro, but not the opposition. And they're going to use that money to buy weapons and create an army of mercenaries to fight a war against the government and its followers. It will be described as a civil war in the media, the same as they did in Syria. But like in Syria, U.S. Special Forces, CIA contractors will be in there to help. And the supply line for such a war will most likely run through Colombia. So, plus the fact that Maduro has to show he's still in control of his own borders here. Now, the United States is trying to get the military to desert Maduro. So far, the vast majority of them are still on his side. The so-called defectors that have been on TV have all turned out to be phonies. They're either wearing the wrong uniforms, they already left the military, some are living in other countries. This so-called high-ranking Air Force general, turns out he's retired. So somebody just basically went in, offered him a bunch of money, and said, here, get on camera and call on the military to desert. Okay, so we're going to do a shout out now to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. So the Bloomberg is reporting that John Bolton is calling for military members to defect en masse and offering sanctions relief, saying that if you will flip over to the opposition, you'll be immune from the sanctions, you'll be able to get your money, you'll be able to move money around, you'll be able to buy things. They're calling it off-ramps. The U.S. will consider sanctions off-ramps for any Venezuelan senior military officer that, quote, stands for democracy and recognizes the constitutional government of President Juan Guaido. Well, again, anybody who stands for democracy has to recognize the elected president, Maduro. And as we reported yesterday, in point of fact, Juan Guaido's seizure of power is not compliant with the Constitution of Venezuela. There are several provisions in there, none of them apply. Guaido just got a phone call from Mike Pence, then he stood up and said, I'm the new president. Now, Maduro has appeared in videos of himself training with his armed forces to deal with an expected U.S. invasion. And basically, Maduro has managed to retain control of much of the military. And he's out there basically trying to show them he's just one of those. He's one of them. He's not just going to hang out in the palace and send them off here. Anyway. Alrighty. Now, over in Syria, we are being told that the U.S. military has finally set a target date for a full withdrawal from Syria, which seems kind of weird when you consider that troops and supplies are pouring in right now. But the Wall Street Journal is reporting that the military plans to pull a significant portion of its forces out by mid-March, with a full withdrawal coming by the end of April, barring the unexpected, like Assad gassing women and children, that evil man here. But the Wall Street Journal seems to feel that this is this is a confident report here. And from this, I would say there's obviously a major fight going on between Trump and the war hawks regarding Syria. And I'm concerned, obviously, that the war hawks are, in fact, going to stage another false flag chemical weapon attack in order to goad Trump into re-escalating the Syrian conflict. All righty. We are hearing from South Front, the Syrian War Report. They're confirming the report that we got from Israeli sources the other day, that the S-300 system is becoming operational. So it's erected, it's cocked, it's ready to go, it's manned up, and that's going to make it very, very difficult for any warplanes to go into Syria. All righty. Apparently the Pentagon, this is over at Breitbart, the Pentagon, which is known for just mismanaging money left and right, They're apparently botching yet another multi-billion-dollar project in Afghanistan. This is a $6 billion effort to modernize the Afghan Air Forces with 159 state-of-the-art Black Hawk helicopters as part of efforts to address capability gaps. Now, in an audit of the program, it was noted that there are not enough Afghan pilots or engineers trained to fly and maintain the aircraft. So somebody wasn't paying attention to that. All right, let's take a phone call. Joe in Tennessee, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind? Joe in Tennessee. Oh, there you are.
Yeah, hey, hi, Mike. This thing in Venezuela, you got to notice this pattern with these countries when they nationalize their resources. The only way they don't get pressured and people militarizing and attacking them is when they give the deed, let's so to say, back to the corporations. I mean, look at Venezuela, look at Iran, look at Cuba. They all have one thing in common, and they nationalized all their industries, and a lot of very rich, powerful people and corporations are left holding, stocks in valueless companies.
Yes.
And the price to get back into the good graces of the economic system is to give those people back their piece of the pie. And that's what you're seeing. I mean, they can hide behind all this other stuff, but it's just the way the world works. It's a shame, but you notice there's a pattern with these countries, the ones that are on the bad boy list, and even Iraq and Iran, of course. They all nationalized their oil industries, and that's a big no-no. It's just like trading oil for gold. So I just, I'm at the point where, you got to just see what's going to happen here. I mean, if there is going to be a war, as a guy that's been over to Iraq and Kuwait, that was a rotten location. So at least it'll be closer to home, and the guys will have more fun down there than they will over there in the Middle East. So in that regard, it'll be a better spot for one. But otherwise, it's shameless, but it's the way the world. I mean, look at Cuba. We're still at war basically with Cuba, and it all gets back to the nationalization of all the property. They want the casinos back in there, and if they don't, they're just always going to be economic sanctions and treated like garbage.
Yeah. It's all about the corporatization of the world, and it's all about control of the oil and control of what currency the oil is traded for. And it's a very predatory foreign policy.
Yeah, and then you look at like who we would deal with. It's like the Chinese. Well, you got to sit down and in order, you got to make the deal with the Chinese. You got to let American corporations go all over the place in there and take advantage of their cheap labor. It's really a rotten system, and it's very difficult to fight this. It is, and but I think that the problem is in order to fight it, you got to understand it. And I think most people, they talk about what's going on in Venezuela, they don't get down to the nitty gritty that it's really economic hitmen that are driving this, and corporations that want their piece of the oil, the money, and they want the mining money and the gold, and all the rich elite families in Venezuela that want it back. And they'll cloak it behind human rights and communism, socialism, whatever. But that's really that's really what's driving this.
Absolutely. You're absolutely right. I mean, all wars are economic, ultimately. All wars are bankers' wars. And again, we got into Afghanistan because there was this consortium of oil companies wanted a pipeline. And the Taliban wanted to charge a fair price for the pipeline right of way, and the consortium didn't want to pay it. So they lobbied Congress and said it's going to be cheaper if you regime change the country and put in a government more willing to work with us on the prices that we set, which is exactly what happened. And they put in Hamid Karzai as the first installed president of Afghanistan, who had been part of that oil company consortium. He'd been representative of Unocal.
Yeah, it's funny. I think the British East Indian Company is still calling the shots. It's just under different names, and they had no problem of starting wars whenever it was in their interest. And I hope Trump can stand up against it, but I doubt it. Not when he's got guys like Elliot Abrams in there. But
yeah, Abrams is he's definitely talking the war talk.
I share your all wars are bankers' wars all the time, and I get a lot of good responses from it.
Thank you.
So I want you to know. So that's like one of the best summations, and it's very well done, and it's not short, but it's short enough, but it really hits it out of the park. So congratulations on that one. It really is a great tool to wake people up with.
Well, thank you. Anything else, Joe?
Not really. I mean, I watched this guy Whitaker today, and if that guy, I know he's leaving as Attorney General in like a week, but he really did well for himself. And if they're gonna, he probably just improved his chances of maybe in a future administration being an Attorney General. They didn't lay a glove on him.
Yep.
And he was very smart. He was really sharp, and I liked his style. He was, really impressive. I was very impressed with him. And I was at the same time, the Democrats are shrill, and they really don't have a very good face. I don't think they understand the image that they project. It's not really middle America.
No, it isn't.
Yeah, they preach to the choir. They preach to like lefties, but they don't seem reasonable. They're shrill. It's like a bunch of like school marms yelling at them. I don't think it came off well as far as the way I look at it, but they like to appeal to the media and the talking heads, and they go right past middle America, and it's just funny to watch, because then they'll be scratching their heads when they lose the election, Well,
unfortunately, unless we overhaul the voting system and we, make sure that illegal immigrants can't vote, they're going to win the next election. That's why they can afford to be shrill and lefties and not. They don't care about appealing to middle America anymore because the elections are not honest anymore.
Yeah, I heard Salente today saying he thinks Beto O'Rourke could run against Trump and he could win. And I actually was thinking about that the other day. Of all the candidates the Democrats could field, because he does have celebrity. He is young, but he's not a radical as far as he doesn't seem like a radical. And he's from Texas. If the Democrats could take Texas, they could beat him. So that's something to look for. The minute I started thinking about it, I said, he could win. But none of the other ones so far, I think, have a chance. But anyway, I thought it was interesting that Salente said so. He's usually pretty sharp.
He's pretty accurate. Of course, again, we're hearing noises that Hillary wants to step back in, but apparently the Democratic Party is just sick and tired of her. I think Americans are sick and tired of her. And she had her shot in 2016, and the American people just didn't like her back then, and they didn't vote for her, and she screamed, "Russian interference, Russia stole my presidency," and just got really hysterical. And again, as you say, it doesn't present a good image to middle America. But the Democrats aren't really interested in courting middle America anymore. Their constituency are the fringe groups, the LGBTQ, the illegal immigrants, the refugees, and so forth and so on. Anyway, Joe, we're going to let you go here. We're coming up on a commercial break. Thank you very much for the phone call. Okay, retired U.S. Brigadier General Don Baldock is saying it's time to admit we have lost in Afghanistan. And he says the Taliban are the victors. We, meaning the United States government, just haven't figured that out yet. And he says absorbing the fact that the U.S. has lost militarily in Afghanistan will be a bitter pill for the soldiers he fought with. And yeah, back in the end of 2001, the Taliban had just been reduced to this tiny fraction of the country. And ever since then, bit by bit, they have recaptured Afghanistan. And I know that there are talks going on now between the Taliban and Afghan officials. The U.S.-backed puppet ruler president is boycotting them, but it looks like everybody wants this thing to be over. All right, we got to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. We're going to go back to the phones to Don in the Philippines. Aloha, Don. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello, Mike. Yes, the deal there with Bolton telling the Venezuelans we're going to lift the sanctions if you just do what we want. That's extortion. That's the word for that is extortion. It's like the mafia guy going to the fruit stand and he says, you give us a certain amount of money, otherwise we're going to break your windows constantly.
Yeah, that's a nice fruit stand you got there. Be a real shame if something happened to it. That's how that goes.
Yeah. And Bolton, so what's his name? Trump has given in to he's given into the swamp when he's got Bolton and Abrams, and
I absolutely agree. I absolutely agree. He didn't drain the swamp. He basically opened the door and invited the alligators and water moccasins in.
Right. He's just going to go along with the program. He's admitted the fact that he can't do anything about it, and he's just
he's a weak leader.
The presidents cannot anymore. The presidents don't even. They find that they cannot dictate foreign policy. Even Obama ran on, we're going to get out of Iraq. No, that didn't happen. We're still in Iraq.
Yep.
Be in Iraq forever, probably.
Well, again, during campaign season, politicians are going to lie. They're going to say what they think you want to hear to get your vote, even if they don't really intend to carry those out. There are actually politicians who insist that lies during political campaign seasons are protected by the First Amendment right to freedom of speech, which I think is hideously distorting the intent of that First Amendment. There are even some politicians out there who are clamoring for legislation that would block challenges to their campaign speeches, rather fact-checking, for so many months before the election. So they could get up there and say anything, and nobody's allowed to say, no, you just told an untruth.
Basically, they're no good. But your previous caller was talking about Whitaker. Whitaker was cool in that they had. I don't know why they had him in front of Congress anyway. He's not being confirmed or anything. That he's just there temporarily. But
well, he was in front of the Judicial Committee. He was not in front of Congress.
Okay, the Judicial Committee. That's what I mean. That's part of Congress. But he was having fun with them. He was just. He was messing him. He was what they call trolling him. He was Sheila tried to get him to answer in a certain way, and he was very polite, but he just wouldn't. He let her know, hey, I don't know you anything, Sheila Jackson Lee. You can go do whatever you want. He told one guy, your 5 minutes is up. You know, he was joking around.
He did very, very well. Well, what the Judicial Committee was trying to do was to get him to make any kind of a statement that could be construed that Trump was somehow interfering with the Mueller investigation, which would be an obstruction charge, and they could impeach on that. And they were desperate to get that, and Whitaker didn't give them that.
Whitaker is a smart guy. He's one of the few. He's the only guy I ever heard of that graduated from college in 3 years. He was playing big time college football for Iowa, which is he's a good athlete. And then his first year of law school, he still played football. So he's the only guy I ever heard of that did that and managed to carry that off. I'll let you go, Mike. Thanks.
All right, thanks an awful lot, Dom. We're going to let you go here. The phone lines are open again. Okay, we've been talking about Adam Schiff. And he is one of the most rabid, and I choose that word deliberately, Russia bashers out there. And it turns out, as Deep Throat said, follow the money. And apparently Congressman Schiff has a billionaire military complex oligarch patron from Ukraine. And in a Zero Hedge post yesterday chronicling the latest Adam Schiff idiocy, where the Democratic congressman spoke to a crowd at the University of Pennsylvania declaring Russian ads promoted the Second Amendment during the 2016 election, so we will kill each other. And commentator Alaric Balth linked some interesting information on Schiff's underlying motivation. Adam Schiff is an owned hatchet man of Ukrainian arms dealer Igor Pasternak. And so Schiff's anti-Russian narrative is carefully orchestrated by his Ukrainian masters. Okay, we've got a caller on the line, Steve Elkins. Steve, I may have to take you through the next commercial break. What's on your mind?
No, your last caller made a good, pointed out something very, very important. He's right that I think Donald Trump has given up on the swamp, the deep state, and he's actually invited them in. I noticed on the, he had the opportunity at the State of the Union address, pointing out this, all the time being wasted on this, basically this investigation of him and Russian collusion. It would have been a good opportunity right then to mention the deep state again, and they're behind that. Of course, this illegal investigation and this nothing investigation. He didn't do it. So I think he has pretty much given up on that whole idea. I never heard the word at all mentioned during the State of the Union address. Deep state seems to be pretty much off the table. He never talks about it. Never talks about the swamp.
Yeah, he's corralled. He's corralled, and it's one of the reasons why, you know, he's a disappointment. Anyway, we got to take another break for commercials. Steve, stay on the line. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. We're still talking with Steve Elkins. We're talking about Donald Trump. We're talking about, I think at this point, you know, a lot of us are very disappointed with him. We're 2 years into his, what I think is going to be one-term presidency, and he's just dropped the ball. And we're even hearing that he may be ready to back off on that border wall. So what can I tell you? Steve, your opinion?
Yeah, I agree with you. At this point, even if he gets the wall, I think he's still going to be a one-term president. You know, I can't even imagine being in his shoes. All the bullets he's dodging right now and everything that's going on around him. I've never seen the mainstream media, be so vicious in attacking of this president. This is the worst I've ever seen, the mainstream media. It's just mind-boggling watching it. I mean, you turn on MSNBC or CNN, and it's like their goal. They've been told to destroy this man as much as you can, discredit him, make him look bad, and you have to deal with that each and every day. I just can't imagine being in his shoes. I wouldn't want a second term. But that will be another 4 years of the same pretty soon. I do have one last question for you. You mentioned yesterday that Maduro having the support of his military, and I agree he does, or this coup would have already been successful. But understanding that only one person is needed in that military to defect, to be a lone assassin to take him out, allowing Guaido in. And I worry that that might be the situation we might have here, that a defector may end up taking out Maduro, and the puppet pick from the United States will actually be the president.
The hard part about that is finding an assassin who's willing to throw their own life away, because I'm sure Maduro realizes he's under direct physical threat, and he's got good security around him. And good security can thwart assassins who want to live after the assassination. The assassins that are impossible to stop are the ones who are willing to die in the process. So that's what would have to be found. That's a bit of a trick.
Yeah, you never know. Some of those people are fanatical over there. You know, they may get 70 virgins in heaven for it. I don't know, but
I think we're talking Venezuela, and I don't think that 70 virgin thing applies as much down there.
That's it, Mike. Thanks a lot.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to switch over to Art Off the Grid. Aloha, Art. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike. Have you heard? Did you hear anything about this document on the Green New Deal?
Yeah, yes, I have. Is that your phone? Art, is that your phone? Art, did we lose you? I guess we did. Apparently, the United States, ignoring its obligations as a host nation to the national UN missions, is continuing to forcibly inconvenience the Russian permanent mission to the UN. Now they're obliging the administrative and technical personnel to obtain driver's licenses through the state authorities, and they routinely deny visas to Russian diplomats traveling for long or short-term business trips, as well as revoking visas. And apparently, starting in January of this year, the Americans introduced a new procedure for obtaining driver's licenses and registering personal vehicles at the permanent mission. And it just adding all kinds of inconvenience. And it's just another way of thumbing their nose at them. Now, Kamala Harris is out there, and she has figured out why our society has become so divided, with black against white and men against women and young against old and gays against straights. It's all Russia's fault. And she just basically tweeted on out saying that Russia was able to influence the last presidential election because it figured out that racism, sexism, anti-Semitism, homophobia, and transphobia are America's Achilles heel. And armed with this top secret information, Russia was able to turn Americans against each other in a way never before seen in history. That is, if you've forgotten most of history. And of course, this is utterly ridiculous. Americans have been turned against each other by politicians, by corporations, by various political agendas. I mean, look at what we saw during 2016. Where the liberals were openly hostile and occasionally violent against conservatives. That wasn't Russia doing that. Okay, Washington has sent several ships to the Black Sea following that incident in the Kerch Strait. And the commander of the U.S. Navy, Admiral John Michael Richardson, has come up with an unexpected suggestion in terms of proactive measures to counter Russia in the Mediterranean and Black Sea. When asked at the Atlantic Council in Washington about the strategy against perceived aggressions from Russia, Richardson reportedly suggested that instead of responding to Moscow's actions, the U.S. should actually push first. In other words, unprovoked, premeditated naval incursions. Now remember the story, because there's a follow-up story further on down that you're going to need to pay attention to. Meanwhile, as the U.S. and Russia continue to trade diplomatic barbs over the U.S. pullout from the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty, Russia is trying to remind the United States that, in point of fact, the Tomahawk missiles were not in compliance with the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces. Yes, there are Tomahawks that carry nuclear warheads. So they're going back and forth on that. Meanwhile, Iran has unveiled an underground ballistic missile factory. And this plant is manufacturing precision ballistic missiles for the aerospace division of its Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corporation. And they basically released a video of it. Apparently, this is deep underground. And basically put it out there saying this is to dissuade Westerners from trying to restrict us and try and keep us from pursuing our long-term goals by means of threats and sanctions. So they're now making new missiles in this new factory. Israel's going to scream and say, "You Americans, go get them for us here." The Pentagon is claiming that oil smuggling and drug running by Iran-backed militias is threatening Iraq's stability. Actually, I think all of that war along its border with Syria might have something to do with that, along with the fact that the U.S. presence in Iraq is seriously destabilizing. The Iraqi people and the government want the U.S. out, but we'll blame Iran. And gosh darn those Iranian oil smugglers and those drug runners. Anyway. Another story, this one a little bit more serious. This is coming out of Fars News. According to Hasht al-Sha'abi commander, he's a senior commander, U.S. plans to approach the Iranian borders in cooperation with ISIL. And this commander, al-Ma'amuri, said that ISIL has increased efforts to infiltrate into regions near Kaonohi at the Iraq-Iran border after Trump declared withdrawal of forces from Syria, adding that the U.S. forces want to find a foothold in certain parts of House Hamrin by creating tensions in the region. Now, he stated that all Iraqi groups have voiced opposition to this measure, noting that Hashd al-Sha'abi will not allow the U.S. to deploy in Dayala and Cobra Base. So, meanwhile, for those of you who may have forgotten, we're still dropping bombs in Somalia. And one case they had here about this woman who got killed and then saw 3 boys, age 9, 10, and 16, just blown to bits right in front of her. And this lady, her house was in ruin, 25 of her goats dead. Now she lives in a refugee camp. But the U.S. is still bombing Somalia. Over in France, one of the members of the parliament, one of the lawmakers, has announced he is leaving French President Macron's governing party a day after an unprecedented number of lawmakers refused to approve what was being called the anti-hooligan bill, which was basically a law aimed at curbing the yellow vest protests. And 50 lawmakers from Macron's Republic on the Move abstained in the vote in the lower house National Assembly. That is a tremendous rebuke. Now, the bill unfortunately still did pass. So things are going to get really kind of ugly for the yellow vests. One of the areas of concern are what are being called the flashball guns. Now, they're described as less lethal guns, but they are kind of like a paintball gun, but they contain a little bit of TNT, some shrapnel, and more tear gas. And France is the only nation in the EU that allows riot police to use this kind of ammunition. Now, the Human Rights League wrote in an appeal to the Council of State, the lack of sufficient guarantees in the French law undermines the constitutional right of life and respect for physical safety. And this Human Rights League seeks to ban the use of these flashball guns. Okay, let's take another phone call. Joe in California, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Mike. You know, I think it's funny that people have been commenting on Trump's awful personnel appointments in the White House, Bolton, Pompeo, Nikki Haley. But this is the same head who hired Michael Cohen and that Omarosa woman. So should we be surprised?
Okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, well, see, here's the reason why people are concerned about Elliott Abrams and Bolton, because Trump campaigned on getting us out of war, and by hiring these people, bringing them on board, he seems to be on board a war agenda, because that's what these guys do. Go back and look at their histories. All they've ever done is mess up other people's countries.
Oh, I agree, but I'm just pointing to his lack of good judgment. He obviously has bad judgment. One of your callers said about a week ago that he doesn't read anything. He just gives reports to his aides, and they'll just filter it through to him in a way that is advantageous to their agenda, not his campaign promises. But, Mike, this Hezbollah connection to Venezuela, I mean, the U.S. has been saying this all along. The Hezbollah exists all throughout Latin America, including in Ciudad de Este, which is that border area, tri-border area where Brazil, Argentina, and Paraguay meet. But I can say this. I've been to Caracas many times, and I can say that there are many Lebanese restaurants. So maybe it's a tenuous link, but maybe Hezbollah does exist in Venezuela.
Well, Hezbollah, despite claim... Well,
that's a joke, by the way.
Yeah, no, I understand it's a joke, but here's the thing. Hezbollah is in Lebanon. They are a military force that holds Israel at bay. They're also a political party. They hold seats in the government. There is no reason for them to be in other countries. But of course, for U.S. propaganda purposes, Hezbollah, they're terrorists and they're everywhere. They're going to get you in your sleep unless we send your kids to invade Venezuela. At this point, though, the lies are becoming so disjointed and reckless, they're becoming very, very obvious. And they seem to have forgotten the first rule of propaganda is that for propaganda to work, it's got to be believable. And it's got to be internally self-consistent. It's got to present a worldview that makes sense. And we have had so many of these claims come on out that don't make any sense at all. I think that's why the propaganda isn't working. And I guess on the principle of if at first you don't succeed, lie again, they'll just come out with a bigger lie. And when that doesn't work, it's a bigger lie. It's almost like, and I think that's why it's really starting to fall apart.
Well, it's like what you said. You say many times. Ask yourself, does it make sense? I point to Operation Northwoods. That this Lemnitzer was promoting. Now, would it have made sense for Castro to have invited an attack by the U.S.? Of course not.
Yeah. Yeah, but back then when they were planning Operation Northwoods, there was no independent media. The American people were very naive and trusting of the government, and they basically bought everything that they were being told. They bought the rationale for Vietnam. They bought Cray's lone nut assassin in the Kennedy assassination. It took something like 30 years to reach the point where half the American people realized the Warren Report was a cover-up. Of course, these days, with the independent media, the lifespan of a government lie can be clocked with an egg timer.
Right, but going back to Venezuela, I mean, yes, there are Lebanese people, ethnic Lebanese, living in Latin America. They exist. They run businesses. Some of them in the Shia community is very active in Western Africa, Ivory Coast, Senegal, those French-speaking former colonies. They're involved in businesses, the diamond business. Some of them may contribute to Hezbollah. Hezbollah is a political party in Lebanon. They have members in the parliament. But using this as a justification for invading Venezuela is outrageous. But it could also be a portal, a way to wage war on Iran. They can point to the connection between Iran and Hezbollah and say, oh, look, we have Hezbollah is in our hemisphere and they're being supported by Iran. Just yet another reason to invade Iran, make war on Iran.
I think one of the articles that we talked about earlier made that claim that Hezbollah, supported by Iran, was in Venezuela. Anyway, listen, got to let you go. We got to take a break for commercials, and we'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here and getting on back to the news. And speaking of Lebanon, apparently Lebanon is really kicking up a huge fuss over Israel's apparent moves to intrude and encroach on Lebanon's offshore oil reserves. And Lebanese Parliament Speaker Nabi Berri has warned Israel could actually deplete his country's potential offshore oil and gas reserves after the Tel Aviv regime awarded energy exploration licenses near a disputed maritime boundary in Mediterranean waters. And again, this follows the pattern we've seen with Israel. It's what they're doing in the Golan. And at one point, Israel tried to claim that the entire eastern end of the Mediterranean seafloor was their territorial area. That didn't go over very well here. All righty. Once again, it's Friday, which means there has been a march for the right of return along the Gaza Strip. And apparently, one Palestinian civilian was shot and later died of his wounds. 100 civilians, including 29 children, 3 women, a journalist, and a female paramedic, were wounded. Over in the West Bank, 9 civilians were wounded. A Palestinian civilian was killed, and a child was wounded near a military checkpoint in the northern West Bank under the pretext of throwing a homemade pipe bomb at the soldiers. Now, here's an interesting little story. This is coming out of Haaretz. And apparently there were some policemen that entered the town of Isawiya in occupied East Jerusalem to, quote, collect debts, end quote. And there was this couple standing in their own home. Nadia and Mazen Abu Hummus were just watching from the window. And Nadia asked Mazen to close the window. And after he did so, one of the policemen just shot through the window, shattered the window, hit him in the face. Now, the couple sued the state of Israel for $28,000 in damages, and Israel replied saying the police officer's conduct was proportionate and reasonable. The couple hadn't done anything. They had watched the police come in, then they closed the window. That was it. How is firing a bullet through their window reasonable and proportionate? Okay. All right, we're getting some nattering and gromishing from the top U.S. commanders in Africa and Latin America, saying that the Belt and Road helps China expand militarily. Well, yes, that's going to be true, but then all countries, when they invest in highway infrastructure or transportation infrastructure, they take into account how this can be used to help the military. We have this road here, the H3. It's part of the Eisenhower Interstate Highway System, which is kind of weird because we're an island. And it was built specifically to connect the Kaonohi Marine Air Station with Pearl Harbor. And yes, we get to use it to go back and forth as well, but it's built really heavy. It'll carry tanks. Okay, there's the music. We got to take a break for station identification, and we'll be back with more news after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. Hour number 2. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. We're going to go to the phones to Morgan in Florida. Aloha, Morgan. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Michael, are you there?
Yes, I'm here, and you're on the air.
Thank you for changing my name from Mo to Captain Morgan.
Well, that's what Mike typed into the text window. Is that not correct?
I like to be like Captain Morgan. Hey, if you don't mind, can I shift gears to Venezuela?
Sure. Okay.
I mean, the Israel thing and the Lebanese thing is just so blatant. It makes me want to throw up. But then so is the Venezuela thing. I mean, can you imagine? I mean, Maduro saying it's going to be the next Vietnam. We don't. This is so much like, and I know I'm preaching to the choir here, but the Roman Empire, the lessons from history were spread out all over the place. All China and Russia has to do is start some fires or whatever it's going to be. We don't have the resources or the manpower to put out all these fires. And
we don't.
What the big concern is because go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was agreeing with you.
Yeah. I mean, I know so I know I'm not going crazy. That's why I listen to your show, because you're so right with it. And I think the big concern is if the Romans had nuclear weapons, before they got invaded by the Visigoths and everybody else, I think they would have used them, don't you?
Of course they would.
Yeah, well, that's where we're at, and that is so. And this with Russia and the United banksters, the nuclear treaty that it's on very shaky grounds, and that doomsday clock is. I don't know, Mike. We just. I mean, don't they see what's going on?
I think the leadership of our country, the deep state, if you will, they're caught up in groupthink. They may individually, privately say, yeah, the country's going in a very dangerous direction, but they don't dare speak out because then they'll get kicked out of the club.
Yeah, I think you're right. But the bottom line is, hopefully everybody wait with shows like yours, and you're right up there in the front. You speak truth to power, and the best you can. I know you're dancing on a type wire there, but I think the bottom line is just people need to wake up quickly, because this is serious stuff, and maybe that's the way it's supposed to go. I don't know, but I do know that getting involved in Venezuela and what happened in Vietnam. One of my buddies had his legs blown off. One of my best friends had his legs blown off. And took 116 pints of blood in Okinawa, like some kind of a record. I didn't go, but I mean, we lost 50,000 plus American soldiers.
Yes.
Well, now we're best buddies. I buy clothes that says Vietnam on it. I mean, I think this Maduro guy. I'm not. I'm like you. I'm not a socialist, but I'm. If there was such thing as free enterprise, and I don't know if it can ever work, but I will tell you this, and I know you know this, that he probably knows they could move into the hills there and cause a lot of damage to any kind of regime change you want to do down in Venezuela. And I think that's just way too many hot spots. Just like the Roman Empire, they were putting out the Gauls, or putting, and they eventually.
You've got all the mountains, you've got all the terrain there. I mean, Maduro and his military could adopt the tactics that the Taliban have employed so successfully in Afghanistan. When they're confronted with a military force, they just retreat. They abandon wherever they are, and then when the military force leaves, they just go right back on in. And it was a war of attrition, and as that retired general said, we have to admit we've lost that one. So let's go have another one down in Venezuela.
How about the Che Guevara handbook? They got the same. He knows.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't mean to rant. I just, I don't envy you in a way. You're out there every night. And I don't know how you do it. You and Claire, God bless you, whoever that is, and you're just good people, and I'll let you go.
All right. Well, Mike. Thank you very much for the phone call. Thank you for the kind words. And getting on back to the news here. North Korea is launching a new loyalty campaign. And this one is a little bit different because a while back, the posters and the videos and everything would feature the military weapons. And now the new campaign is focused on the nation's flag. And they have a new song in praise of the nation's flag. And so this video is a departure from the tone of the propaganda that dominated as little as 2 years ago. So there's a signal that there is a change in the wind. Okay, we're going to do a shout out to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining the network. Okay, I want to talk about this, and this gets back to that admiral who is literally saying, let's just have premeditated, unprovoked naval incursions into Russian waters. That's what he wants to do. And this goes back to the accident with the USS Fitzgerald, which was this Aegis ship that had this horrible collision out here in the Pacific. It's part of the 7th Fleet, which is supposed to be our most powerful armada. And remember when it first happened, there was propaganda all over the internet, even people calling into my show saying, oh, that cargo ship deliberately attacked our Aegis ship. That it had to be a deliberate attack. Well, the Navy disagreed. They relieved the top commanders. And it turns out that there was this admiral, Admiral John Richardson, who said these two collisions could have been avoidable. Now, Vice Admiral Joseph Alcoin, I guess, was commander of the 7th Fleet at the time of the collisions. Now, this guy is a veteran. He was a naval aviator. He fought in the Balkans. He fought in Iraq. And apparently, when he came in and took command of the 7th Fleet, he looked around and said, this is an absolute disaster. And apparently the problem is that the U.S. government has been spending much of its military budget on all these land wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, and they neglected the Navy. And this was something that I think was evident at the time, that the crew that was on the bridge of the Fitzgerald and then later the USS John S. McCain were not adequately trained. So the Navy's investigation ran to 13,000 pages, and some of the stuff that they found was neglect by Navy leadership, serious mistakes by officers, coupled with extraordinary acts of valor and endurance by the crew. Starting off with it, the Fitzgerald's captain selected an untested team to steer the ship at night. He ordered the crew to speed through shipping lanes filled with cargo ships and fishing vessels in order to free up time to train his crew the next day. At the time of the collision, he was asleep in his cabin. Now, the 26-year-old officer of the deck, who was in charge of the ship at the time, had navigated the route only once before in daylight. And in a panic, she ordered the Fitzgerald to turn directly into the path of the Crystal. The Fitzgerald's crew was exhausted and undertrained. The inexperience showed in a series of near misses in the weeks before the crash, when the destroyer maneuvered dangerously close to other vessels on at least 3 occasions. So that wasn't the first one. It didn't happen in a vacuum. Now, the warship's state of readiness was in question. And mind you, this ship was supposedly on some kind of a secret mission to the South China Sea. The warship's state of readiness was in question. The Navy requires destroyers to pass 22 certification tests to prove themselves seaworthy and battle-ready before sailing. The Fitzgerald had only passed 7. It was not even qualified to conduct its chief mission, which is anti-ballistic missile defense, which is what the ship is built to do. Pardon me. A sailor's mistake sparked a fire, causing the electrical system to fail, leading to a ship-wide blackout 1 week before the mission, resulting in the crash. The ship's email system for both classified and non-classified material failed repeatedly. Officers were using Gmail. The USS Fitzgerald's radar were in questionable shape, and it's not clear the crew knew how to operate them. One could not be made to automatically track nearby ships. To keep the screen updated, a sailor had to push a button literally 1,000 times an hour. The ship's primary navigation system was run by 17-year-old software. So the Navy inquiries determined there had been widespread problems with leaders regarding shortfalls in training, manning, and equipment in the 7th Fleet. And a lot of people got fired. So that's the condition of our Navy. I'm sure it's not confined to just those 2 ships. In fact, according to the former commander of the 7th Fleet, it is epidemic. So are we really ready to start sailing into the Black Sea and the Kerch Strait to challenge the Russians? I don't think so. All right, let's get into the domestic politics. And apparently Robert Mueller's investigation has filed a motion in court where basically Mueller was trying to basically get Flynn, even though the FBI agents who interviewed Flynn believed he was truthful in his answers. But Mueller needed to create crimes out of lawful conduct in order to advance his rigged witch hunt. So he threatened Flynn with financial ruin in a protracted legal battle, and possibly even jailing his son over their lobbying work for the Turkish government to get the decorated military veteran to plead guilty to 1 single felony count. And that was the first notch in Mueller's belt or gun handle, and the media hailed it as a sign that he was on track to eventually get Trump. But nobody knows for certain what Flynn told Mueller and his team. But Mueller has now released his sentencing memo and recommended no jail time for Flynn. So that's an interesting thing. We had a caller who called in about Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's Green New Deal proposal. Now, Alexandria tends to blow hot and cold. Some of the things she says are really out there, like the earth is going to die in 12 years. Some things she's right on point. She was talking in Congress about National Institute of Health grants to pharmaceutical corporations to pay for the research to create the new drugs. Then the pharmaceutical corporations sell those drugs for inflated prices, and nothing comes back to the National Institutes of Health. And she thinks that's wrong. And actually, so do I. Those National Institute of Health grants should be looked at as venture capital investments. And if the product is a success, some of that money should be coming on back. But she is talking now about this Green New Deal, which Nancy Pelosi has already basically dismissed it. And Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is basically out there talking about eliminating all carbon emissions. And she does mean all carbon emissions, even though that would result in the collapse of the chain of life here on Earth. So she's calling to upgrade or replace every building in the United States for state-of-the-art energy efficiency. She wants this done, I think, in the next 10 years. She wants to totally overhaul transportation by massively expanding electric vehicle manufacturing, build charging stations everywhere, build out high-speed rail at a scale where air travel stops becoming necessary, and create affordable public transit available to all, with a goal to replace every combustion engine vehicle. Well, there's a couple of problems here. As of right now, electric vehicles are still powered, for the most part, by oil-fired generating stations. So you're not getting rid of the carbon emissions. Second, high-speed rail would be a very nice thing. Okay? But you can't make air traffic simply go away. I mean, for one thing, there's no train tracks coming out here to Hawaii, as our Senator Mazie Hirono made a point of commenting on here. Not to mention getting to places like Japan or Europe. Alexandria wants a job with a family-sustaining wage, family and medical leave, vacations, retirement security for every American. I'm certain that every single American would want the same thing. Where is it going to come from? We don't have an economy that is supporting this. I mean, I guess Alexandria is going to plant a magical job tree. She also wants to plant lots of real trees. And that's a good idea. Back when Al Gore was first selling this idea of human-caused global warming, one of his staffers, doing a study for the carbon credits, did some calculations and came back and said, if we just increase plant growth by 15%, we can negate rising carbon rates. We won't need carbon taxes and carbon credits. Needless to say, Al Gore fired him. And the fifth thing that Alexandria wants in her Green New Deal is to abolish farting cows. And I guess she's going to go back to the Obama court for that one here. So Nancy Pelosi was not on board with this. She's calling it the Green Dream or whatever. And like so much in politics, it sounds really good. It has not been thought all the way through. Meanwhile, Tulsi Gabbard is driving the corporate media just out of their mind. They're trying to find some way to derail her. And part of the problem, of course, is, she's young, she's visually pleasing, she's very popular, but most important, she is a military veteran, which means when it comes to discussing the war agenda, she has gravitas. And, okay, we seem to be having some more technical issues today. Okay, Mike, can you hear me?
Yeah, we are having technical issues. We're trying to get things back up.
Okay, but you can hear me, but we're not going out over the air on RBN.
Correct. We're booting up the encoder right now.
Okay, all right. Well, I'm just going to keep talking for the benefit of the YouTube audience, and let me know when things get back up. And
we're going to probably post the YouTube link in the archive, so that'll have the whole audio.
Okay, all right, that'll be fine. And folks, this seems like a good time to mention that Republic Broadcasting needs your financial support. As you can tell, our equipment is getting old. It's getting worn out. It's in worse shape than the equipment on the USS Fitzgerald. So we need you to bail on in. And so the postal address where you can send a check, money order, or if you prefer anonymity cash, is Republic Broadcasting Network, 2251 Double Creek Drive, number 302, Round Rock, Texas, 78664. The phone number to make a credit card or debit card donation or to pledge to be a recurring subscriber is 800-724-2719, extension 1 during business hours, extension 3 at all other times. And let's see, there we are. So, we're talking about Tulsi Gabbard. She's a military veteran. She's very much opposed to war, and I think that's why already, this far ahead of the election, they're trying to find some way to attack her and get her out of the field. They don't want any anti-war candidates running in 2020, which tells us they're planning a big one. Okay. Apparently, former ESPN host Jemele Hill tweeted an assassination reference during Trump's State of the Union address. And apparently the Secret Service is saying they're aware of that. Okay, we got to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. We're going to go back to the phones to Al in Canada. Aloha, Al. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike.
Hi.
You were just talking about Sandy, Alexandria, and, you know, socialism versus capitalism sort of thing. Now, like, I'm not a socialist. Obviously, I live in Canada. It's kind of a socialist country to an extent, and it's getting worse. But do you think, like, in your opinion, because you've lived there, you know, your whole life in the United States, do you think basic infrastructure, you know, roads, water, sewage, like that sort of thing, should be private, or do you think it should be controlled and or owned, you know, by the public?
I think it should be publicly owned and administered by the government. I mean, that's the one legitimate purpose of government, is to provide for the community what the community cannot organize for itself. And that would be things like dams, roads, you know, railroads, and so forth and so on. But these are basically needed infrastructure that the public depends on to engage in commerce. And every time that there's been privatization, you know, the people are impoverished by this. And again, it's part of this encroaching corporatism that we're starting to see. And there's another name for corporatism, and that's called fascism.
Yeah, exactly. So, you know, that lady's ideas, like the green thing, you were talking about high-speed rail, and I have a friend that works in the railroad, and I've talked to him extensively about this. And, you know, that would be a great place to invest taxpayers' money. I mean, obviously, your country doesn't have any. My country doesn't have any. As a matter of fact, I don't know any Western country that actually does have any taxpayers' money. They have lots of bank credit, though.
Yep.
But obviously, you know where I'm going to go with this. The problem with her idea is you're already $22 trillion in debt to the Federal Reserve, which is a private corporation. And even if your government were to print Treasury notes to cover that $22 trillion, I mean, it's astounding to actually think that this would happen, interest-free, and continue on that course, the economy would collapse. Do you think that would really happen, Mike?
Yeah, it would, because right now they're having trouble finding people to buy Treasury notes anyway. China and Russia are dumping them. I suspect the Federal Reserve is just creating new money and buying back those Treasury bonds itself, which is kind of like, you know, a snake chasing its own tail. But at some point you have to have absolute value. As far as the rail system is concerned, right now our current tracks in this country won't support high-speed rail. And a lot of people don't know about this. I learned about it because I spent some time with a railroad museum when we were living in Washington State. Tracks have to be rated as to how much weight at what speed they can take. And so, you know, it's not just a case of the train chugging on down at full tilt on the rails. There are, in fact, speed limits that have to be maintained. and the tracks get inspected, and as they deteriorate over time, which they do, the rating gets dropped, and the trains have to go slower and slower. Now, if you take a look at those high-speed trains that are being built in Japan and in Europe, and you look at those tracks, you'll see tremendous difference between their tracks and what we have here in the U.S. and Canada. And I'm not talking about the maglev. I'm talking about the ones that are still running on wheels here.
Yes. Yep. You just nailed it, Mike. And even like the LT rail up in Canada, my friend said it's $1 million a kilometer. That's just 1 kilometer. You know, that's not very far. You know, it's a couple of blocks. And so when you get into maglev or even high speed, he couldn't give me a real number, but he said it's got to be approaching $50 million a kilometer, which would be, you know, like 0.7 miles or something like that, right? Or 0.65 miles, something like that. But it's a huge, huge undertaking. I'm not saying it can't be done. I'm just saying that I'm pointing out a simple fact that I love her idea. I've talked to this with a friend of mine, but where do you get the cash to do it?
Well, like I said, her ideas sound good when they come out of her mouth. They haven't been thought through. And I think that's why Pelosi and pretty much a lot of the other Democratic leadership have just dismissed it outright as not being viable. And they're right. I mean, I agree with the, plant more plants. That's a good one. That we can actually do. We can all do that. But some of the other ideas, like rebuilding every building in this country over the next 10 years, no, it can't be done. Anyway.
10 years is, thanks, Mike.
Anyway, Al, we've got another commercial break coming up here. I'm going to have to let you go. Thank you for the phone call, and we'll be back with more news after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And before we get back to the news, if you're getting your worldview just from the corporate media, you'd think the only things that were happening is these scandals down in Virginia and this fight between Jeff Bezos and the National Enquirer, because they're not really covering a whole heck of a lot of anything else since Whitaker stopped talking. All righty, getting on back to the news here. Apparently, anonymous State Department officials leaked to the media that Donald Trump was keeping loyalty lists. And so somebody filed a Freedom of Information Act request, and basically they couldn't find him. There's no evidence that Trump appointee Marie still made loyalty lists. That was an attempt to sort of link Trump back with Nixon, who had his enemies list. And I would imagine that probably everybody in a position of power, they have a list of who their friends are and so forth and so on. Anyway, about this National Enquirer thing, apparently Jeff Bezos was trying to investigate how private texts got to be published in the National Enquirer. And the National Enquirer came on back and said, if you don't stop the investigation, we're going to publish some very revealing nude photos of you and your mistress, along with, some of the sleazy texts. And this is unfortunately how the press works. But Bezos, to his credit, has gone public. And he's already published all the stuff himself. And so he's in high dudgeon on that one. All right, getting into the economic news here. It was not a great day on the stock market. I believe it ended in the red. And he said, pulling out his little stock ticker. Well, the Dow ended in the red. The S&P 500 and NASDAQ microscopically got into the green, but they were very low earlier in the day as well. So that prediction that February was going to be a volatile month seems to be shaping up here. According to the latest Gallup poll, most see the U.S. economy as slowing or declining. They're not buying all this corporate media politician nonsense about the economy is hale and hearty and everything's going good, and we just don't understand why you're not out there spending money. Now, the tariffs on China are having an effect. The trade deficit has tumbled because imports from China are, in fact, slowing down. And so that part is currently working. The missing component, though, is we've got to get America retooled to make those products China used to make for us here. Meanwhile, another view of what's going on over at Zero Hedge, China is confident Trump will drop the tariffs even without concessions. And apparently there's only 3 weeks left until the deadline to reach a trade deal. And there hasn't been a lot of progress, according to the Wall Street Journal. Now, one area that China has in their economy, they're a major consumer of mined diamonds. But now they have apparently come up with a process that makes synthetic diamonds. And I'm not talking about zircons or yttrium arsenide garnets or any of the other faux diamonds. These are real carbon crystal diamonds. And they've mastered the technologies to manufacture them en masse within a short period of time. And the products are described as practically indistinguishable from those mined from Earth. Now, China has been producing well over 10 billion carats of diamonds annually for almost a decade, according to the country's industry estimates. Most of these synthetic diamonds are going for industrial purposes, abrasives, drill tips, and so forth. And they were provided for aeronautics, oil rigs, and apparently electronic ships here. So apparently they have also succeeded in producing gem-quality stones. This, of course, is going to anger Israel and De Beers, who have had a lock on the diamond trade for a long time. But you know, the diamond trade is a big hoax. We're told that these gemstones have these incredibly high prices because they're so rare. Oh my goodness, they're rare. That's why you have to pay all this money. They're not rare. There's enough of them out there for every married woman to have one or more on her fingers. You go to any shopping mall, there's usually 4 or 5 jewelry stores with cases full of diamonds. That doesn't sound like something that's rare to me. Anyway, Russia is considering eliminating their tax on gold to reduce domestic demand for the U.S. dollar. And this could also help returning capital worth tens of billions of rubles to the country. Okay. All right. So anyway, a lot of people are now finding out, this being tax time of year, that the GOP tax cut was a great deal for the corporations and the ultra wealthy. It really hasn't turned out to be all that good for the middle class. In fact, a lot of middle class people are finding their tax bills are going to be higher this year. So the strain continues. Another article, this one coming out of IntelliHub, living paycheck to paycheck, the new crisis and the new normal for the American middle class. And it says about 78% of workers in the United States are living paycheck to paycheck. They're only one missed paycheck away from poverty and homelessness. And the statistics do not improve from there. That's life under fascism. The wealth concentrates at the top. That's exactly where we are. Now, one of the things that Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is saying is that, you know, billionaires are immoral and that something should be done to limit their wealth and influence. And on that, I heartily agree after seeing the antics of people like Sheldon Adelson and the Koch brothers and certainly Bill Gates. There's another problem that's happening out there. This is across the Midwest. Okay. All right. U.S. farmers in the Midwest are filing for bankruptcy at levels the U.S. hasn't seen for a decade. This is coming out of the Wall Street Journal. And the problem is low commodity prices are gouging farmers' bottom lines for years now, exacerbated by increasing agricultural competition from Russia and Brazil. Trump's trade disputes are adding salt to the wounds as tariffs drive down prices and decrease profits. So here is the problem. What happens if a large number of farms go out of business? You could see a serious disruption in the food supply chain. And the farmers are having a tough time of it. And by the way, farming isn't easy. A lot of people having a stereotypical idea of farmers is basically, oh, they plant in the spring, they harvest in the fall, and the rest of the time they just sit around the country store. And that's an image that's promoted on TV shows and films, but it's really very hard work. And they're dealing with things like regulated low prices, tariffs, and the inability to export, and it's really been a problem. And again, part of the problem is GMO. There are countries that will not accept GMO. The average farm income has fallen to a near 15-year low under Trump's policies. And as I said in the previous article, bankruptcies are soaring. And they're not the only one. Wisconsin-based retail chain Shopko Stores has announced more stores closing as they try and emerge from bankruptcy. They're getting ready to close another 139 Shopko and Shopko hometown stores. That brings the list of total closings to 251, about 2/3 of the company's retail locations. And as a matter of fact, one of our local music chains here on the island had several outlets. They're closing. All right, let's talk about immigration. Apparently, U.S. Border Patrol agents said Thursday that they apprehended several illegal immigrants at the southern border in Texas in places where there are no physical barrier walls to deter illegal crossings. I keep telling you, got to get crocodiles into that Rio Grande. And among those caught crossing into the U.S. were a Mexican man with a previous conviction in Georgia for child molestation, a Honduran man with a record in North Carolina showing a conviction for what is described as indecent liberties with a child, and another Honduran male with a Florida record that identified him as a member of the MS-13 gang. So there are just huge gaps in that fence. Now, Pelosi is vowing there will be no government shutdown, and she'll work with Trump on everything except the wall. And she's saying this is all going to be done by the 15th. There'll be a deal. And Pelosi had an interview on Politico, and where she promised there will not be a shutdown. So I think Pelosi is letting her ego get the best of her. She's out to prove that she and not Trump runs the administration. And do you remember that ridiculous statement that came out in that interview where she said the Constitution makes her the equal of the president? No, it does not. I have read that Constitution. It's not in there. Now, as you know, pardon me, up in Portland, Oregon, they're dealing with a measles outbreaks, which the corporate media is blaming on all those people who refuse to have vaccines. Okay. What the corporate media isn't telling you is that all of those who have been diagnosed brought the disease in with them from other countries. Now, Trump himself appears to be backing off the immigration issue. And if you remember his State of the Union speech, he basically said he wanted to push to increase the number of legal immigrants coming into our country to the largest numbers ever. And of course, the billionaire Koch brothers cheered, saying, "We agree," because it's going to crush wages. And Trump basically said we need people in our country because our unemployment numbers are so low and we have massive numbers of companies coming back into our country. If you believe your own propaganda, you will make bad decisions. We don't have record low unemployment. And only a few companies have tried to come back into the United States. Meanwhile, we have companies that are leaving, like Ford. Now, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez shed a tear Thursday during a press conference held by a liberal group to protest the continuing flow of taxpayer dollars to immigration and customs enforcement. She wants basically to abolish it. And her rationalization now is saying Latinos can't be illegals because America is native land. That's her latest spin. Well, if that's the case, then the real Native Americans don't have to live on those reservations anymore, do they? I mean, that is really silly. We do have borders. Ocasio-Cortez can't just stand up and say, oh, well, it's all Latin land. Actually, no. If you study the history of this continent, you know, much of it began as British land, French land, and Dutch land. Now, unsealed indictment over at ICE reveals that 3 birth tourism agencies, there's a crackdown going on, have given birthright citizenship to 8,500 babies of foreign nationals. Over in France, and this is interesting because we've been talking about that for here in the United States. But over in France, a quarter of the French people believe the elites are using mass migration to replace the native Europeans. Not really sure where the native Europeans are supposed to go. But apparently there was a study released by the Jean Jaurès Foundation and found that 27% of the French believe that the elites want the native French gone and the refugees to come on in. We're coming up here on the Brexit. Theresa May came back from Brussels empty-handed, and the fear-mongering is continuing in the British press. And so looking at this article, this is out of The Guardian, British exporters sending goods to far-flung destinations in the coming days risk being locked out of harbors around the world as a no-deal Brexit looms. And they're basically out there saying that, oh, well, there's all these trade agreements. They would instantly be invalid, and these ships would not be allowed to enter into the harbors. This is more fear-mongering by the Eurocrats. The people who want to import from Great Britain will still want to import from Great Britain. There'll be pressure on their governments to sign trade deals. Now, Trump promised that when Brexit happened, he would immediately sign a trade deal with Great Britain. And harbors aren't going to want to enforce locking out ships. Harbors make money off of ships that load and unload. So they're not going to be eager to go along with this idea of, oh, you can't let the British ships come on in. What are these countries going to do? Use their navies to blockade their own harbors? Now, there's another report, this is coming out of the Express, that Britain is planning major tax cuts to the value-added tax and corporation tax to kickstart the economy in the event of a no-deal Brexit. Well, yeah, that's going to work. Anytime there's a massive tax break, the economy lights up. Now, as you know, Angela Merkel is nearing the end of her career, and the woman largely expected to take over as chancellor, Annegret Kramp-Karrenbauer, is calling for an EU army to avoid being a plaything of the US, China, and Russia. So they're still pushing for that grand federalized European nation with one army here. All right, we're coming up here on another commercial break, and we'll be back with more news after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And this one, I think, is going to tell you why so many people in Europe are angry with this open border refugee situation. Up in Sweden, they're basically building this migrant city. And it's being built over an ancient Viking site. And apparently part of the problem is that Sweden appointed a Pakistani Muslim as head of the National Heritage Board. You would think that given this is Sweden, you would want somebody who was Swedish in charge of their national heritage. So basically what this guy has gone on and done is authorized that these Viking artifacts be just sold as scrap, just melted down. And from incidents like this is where you get this feeling in Europe that they're losing their culture, which they are. Alrighty, Hartford Manor Primary School, a school in Cheshire, was going to put on a play about Charles Darwin and his theory of evolution. And apparently they got calls from several families that they said you can't do that. Charles Darwin was wrong. There's no evolution. And so the school canceled the play. A lot of people are saying it was an absolutely shameful thing to do. And yes, it was. Okay, if you want to learn about how God made the universe, that's what the churches are for. The schools are to teach the real world. And I know I'm going to get calls on that one. You don't see, physics professors demanding to go into a church to talk about the laws of motions. Anyway, okay, on with the show. We're still we've had major technical gremlins here today. Out in California, as you know, they just passed a new law providing for non-binary genders on the state driver's licenses, which means you can mark your gender as simply X instead of male or female. Unfortunately, the problem is this is requiring young women to subsidize young men by paying higher auto insurance rates. Women are lower risk drivers than men. That's the statistic. But if you're not identifying your gender, then you get to pay a little bit more for your insurance. Didn't think that one all the way through. Up in San Francisco, as you know, they have a problem trying to control illness and everything. They handed out a record 5.8 million free syringes last year. The problem is too few people are not bringing them back, and there are 2 million unaccounted for syringes still missing. Now, they're probably just lying out on the street where somebody could step on them. So you can see what a problem. What has happened to our country? All right, we're going to take a break here for station identification. When we come on back, the lovely Lady Claire will be joining us. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. Hour number 3. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. And for those of you watching on YouTube, this gorgeous creature sitting next to me is the lovely Lady Claire, who does like to spend the third hour every Friday with her unique perspective on the world. So what's the first thing that you want to talk about?
Well, this threw me rather for a loop. And it comes to us from Blacklisted News, which is a very thoughtful blog, and you may want to go visit. And the first is, did you know that the Zika virus is patented? And guess who owns it? Now,
I'm a little surprised.
Yes.
Yeah,
okay, there we are. The World Health Organization, WHO, dubbed the Zika virus a global health emergency in February 1st, 2016, without detailing much about the disease at all. And they didn't want the public, that's you and me, to know that both it is patented, it is a sexually transmitted virus, and has existed for a lot of years, and it's actually marketed by Middlesex, United Kingdom-based cell and microbiology culture provider LGC Standards Limited, and Manassas, Virginia-based reference microorganisms provider American Type Culture Collection. Now, the Zika virus can be purchased online, believe it or not, from the ATC-LGC partnership for €599 by the Rockefeller Foundation.
Well, no, it doesn't say that the virus can be bought online, because who would want to do that?
Oh, I know.
They're saying basically the Rockefeller Foundation bought the rights to the Zika virus for
Who knows?
Small sum of 599 years.
Yeah.
So now it's exclusive. So all research and development cures for Zika are going to be monopolized. Now, the Zika story, of course, is a little complex. It has been around for a very long time. And it's actually a very minor illness in humans. But it made the headlines, I think it was about a year and a half ago, when there was an epidemic of microcephalic babies that were being born in Brazil. And the mothers had all been part of, and you know this is coming, an experimental vaccine trial. At the time they got pregnant. But of course we can't say the vaccines are harming these little babies. It must be the Zika virus is leading to these microcephalic babies, even though microcephaly has never been a symptom of Zika. So that's the backstory on the Zika virus. But see, now they've fanned it up. It's big news. Everybody's terrified of the Zika virus, and there's going to be big money in a vaccine for Zika or cures for Zika.
And in another little footnote to scientific history, in 1947, researchers from the Rockefeller Foundation placed a rhesus monkey in a cage in the middle of the Zika forest in Uganda. And the team was investigating possible causes of yellow fever, but instead of finding out more about that, they made a discovery. Rhesus 766 would become known as the first carrier of the Zika virus.
Yes.
Wow. And there's another story. It goes on to talk about genetically modified mosquitoes.
Yes.
And in July of 2012, there was a British biotech company, Oxitec, and it announced that it had a large-scale genetically modified mosquito farm in Brazil. Now, this was instituted over the goal of decreasing the incidence of dengue fever. And here we get kind of attached because we're in Hawaii.
Yes.
Todd Shelley, an entomologist from the Department of Agriculture in Hawaii, stated that 3.5% of the insects in a lab experiment managed to reach adulthood despite carrying a deadly gene. Now, tetracycline and other antibiotics are now showing up in the environment and soil and surface water samples. These GM mosquitoes were designed to die in the absence of tetracycline, which was introduced in the lab to keep them alive long enough to breed. And with tetracycline exposure, like in a lake, these mutant insects could possibly thrive in the wild, potentially creating a nightmarish scenario.
Well, this is why we've had so many of these communities where these experimental GM mosquitoes are being sprayed out over the population. These communities are very upset because this is very reckless science. And as you can see here, unforeseen consequences of the fact that we've toxified our environment. Now, dengue fever is a nice buzzword. Most of the people who get it will never know they get it. About 25% of the people who get it, it comes across as a mild flu bug. Only about, I think, 3% who get it will go the full hemorrhagic route. I actually got dengue down on the Big Island. I was in that 25% where I felt ill for a few days, and that was it. All right, we're going to take a phone call here from Robert in California. Aloha, Robert. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind? Robert, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. Can you hear me?
I can hear you, and you're on the air.
Okay. Yeah, I'm glad to see the Clara sitting there beside you, looking all healthy and such.
Yeah, thank you. That was a rough patch.
This last week she's actually doing a lot better, and we're just trying to keep her that way. But it was a rough year. It was a very, very rough year, and she's still forbidden to do housework.
Yes, dear.
All right. We argue about that a lot. I got to be the only husband on earth that has to beg to do housework.
So, Robert, what's on your mind?
Well, Clara, I'm really glad to hear you're doing okay.
Thank you.
And that was first and foremost on my mind. I called in a couple of days ago, kind of hoping for your better health. And you guys, you really rock. I really appreciate everything you guys are doing for us, but you know, when it comes down to it, I've got a little bit of I guess I've just got a bone to pick.
Okay.
don't know how to really approach the issue, but when we're coming down to this whole like big picture scenario of what's going on in our government, it really feels like a lot of the talk show radio hosts are they're nitpicking on like these detailed issues, and we all need to be looking at the bigger picture right now.
I agree.
Just saying.
Yeah.
I'm just.
Yeah.
Well, I'm in agreement with you that we can get lost in the minutia, and I do try and keep us out of that. But on the other hand, you know, trying to find some kind of structure in the big picture, we can get lost in the void as well.
Well, let's look at the simplicity of this Zika virus. You guys have been talking about that recently on air.
Yes.
So that's a good avenue for us to approach. Now, what's your view on the Zika virus, and how do you think it's going to affect society in an overall perspective?
Well, again, as I mentioned a little while ago, Zika's actually been around for a very, very long time. It's never before presented microcephaly as a symptom. It's I think being hyped up to create a new market for new medical products.
Yeah, we're both on the same page. I think it's been around for a while and nobody has been really taking any attention to it. The only reason they're taking any attention to it right now is that it might actually motivate their objective.
Well, that depends on what the objective is. I mean, I think the objective is to just find another product line to get more money out of people who are being scared to death of the viruses by corporate media. We're all being turned into germaphobes.
There are a lot of objectives out there.
Yes.
There are a lot of objectives, and you're right. The monetary objective might be a priority, but, you know, when it really comes down to it, don't you think that maybe there's just some reason for us to all reflect on the fact that this is all part of a deeper agenda?
Well, what do you think the agenda is?
Well, oh gosh. Well, oh gee, let me condense this into a very quick perspective. Okay. I think the agenda is basically to make sure to depopulate the planet in a way that's going to allow the elites to objectify whatever goal they're going for.
Okay, I'm not sure what the phrase objectify their goal means, but
so roundabout it, but
okay, Robert, if depopulation were the agenda, Zika is not an ideal pathogen to use. It's very slow to infect. In fact, it's sexually transmitted. So it's not an effective population reduction agent. Now, if that Ebola gets out of the Democratic Republic of the Congo.
Hold on, Mike. Hold on. Mike, it is not a sexually transmitted disease. It is a disease that is transmitted by saliva or airborne whatevers.
Okay, in all my research on Zika, I never read that it was airborne. It was always some kind of contact.
Really? Okay, I would read up on that if I were you.
Okay.
It is definitely airborne.
Okay, but again, Robert, getting on back to its lethality rate and the rate at which it spreads infection, it's not an effective population control vector. Anyway, Robert, thanks an awful lot for the call. We're going to let you go. We're going to let you go. Thank you. We're going to do a shout out now to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining the network, and we're going to get back here to the lovely Lady Claire.
Okay. Next, I would like to talk about a phenomenon that we're seeing more and more. Peaceful protests under fire. And there is an organization called DRAD, D-R-A-D. It's an acronym for an organization about rights and dissents. And it's apparently getting harder and harder in the most peaceful way possible for Americans to be able to protest anymore. And there are lots of anti-protest bills coming up at state and the national level.
Yes.
And there's a state legislative session. And already about a dozen bills have been introduced across the country that will assault the right to protest. New Jersey, for example, could start charging protesters with rioting and sentence them to 5 years in jail if another person at the protest damages property.
All right, let's be a little bit clear on that. So let's say that you go to a protest and somebody else, possibly an agent provocateur, causes property damage, and then New Jersey comes on in and arrests us and says, you're going to jail for 5 years. Yeah, that is definitely an effort to chill protest. They got to be getting really scared. I mean, this is kind of like what Macron is trying to pass over there in France.
Oh, I know.
Or actually, he did get the bill through.
Yeah. And states like Oklahoma could start charging stiff fees to protest at the state capitol. And Missouri, being Missouri, could start throwing anyone who engages in any civil disobedience that impedes traffic in jail for 15 years. Whoa, would you say that's a little bit draconian?
I think that's a little bit stiff. I mean, you don't get that much time for holding up a 7-Eleven.
Yeah. And this is not just with the states I've mentioned. And this organization has been fighting for protests that are clear, clean, not harmful. And they work a lot with grassroots activists on the ground who are leading a lot of coalitions of national groups defending the right to protest. And what they've done, and you can find this again in Blacklisted News, they are launching a series of toolkits designed to help activists fight these bills wherever they can pop up. And they include background readings, fact sheets, talking points, sample letters to the editor and testimony, and even grassroots success stories. And first of them is Protest Under Fire, anti-protest bills and the targeting of social media. Protest Under Fire, critical infrastructure bills and targeting of anti-pipeline protests. And then the last one is Protest Under Fire, anti-boycott bills and the targeting of the Palestinian Solidarity Movement to defend the right to boycott. Mike, if I thought when I was a kid coming up in college that we would be having all this Sturm und Drang about peaceful protesting, it's amazing.
Well, you know, our Bill of Rights is being chipped away at. And as I was saying about this whole BDS thing, if they establish an exception for Israel, there'll be other exceptions. And you just mentioned one. You know, can't protest an oil pipeline.
Nope.
Can't protest any large corporations. You know.
That's where we're going in. Speaking of large corporations, again, in Blacklisted News, they're doing some good stuff. I suggest you might want to go over there and look. Amazon is recording and using facial recognition to track sellers. And what they're doing, they're recording people's faces and saving the footage to identify them at a later date. Now, if you're a privacy-conscious individual, that's got to be scary as heck, Mike.
I suppose I could wear my Donald Trump mask.
Oh, that'd be interesting.
Okay.
Yes. The site wants to use 5-second snippets of video to record a person's face if they wish to become a seller on the online marketplace.
Okay, so this is not being aimed at people who are buying from Amazon, but from the sellers.
Yeah.
And actually I can see why they're doing this because there's been a huge problem over at Amazon with fake sellers and counterfeit goods.
Yeah. Well, you know, maybe the technology will be used widely, but after identifying the unholy triumvirate of Twitter, Facebook, and I'm forgetting one.
YouTube. Google.
Yeah, I mean, what else are they going to use this data for? I can see a good reason, but I don't know how long are they going to track?
I think basically if they're talking about fraudulent sellers and counterfeit goods, I think it's about having a database where when somebody comes on and says, I want to sell something, they're recognized as having been a problem before.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense.
All right, we're going to go to the phones here to Dustin in New Jersey. Aloha, Dustin. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike, was that last caller from Los Angeles? Because if he goes into City Hall, he might get depopulated for those pilots.
Yeah, that's That's a problem. They're talking about having to replace all the carpeting in City Hall now. The flea problem is so bad.
Oh, yeah. Really rough.
Yeah, it's not the only rats that are underneath City Hall either.
Well, you know, the rats in the three-piece suits, at least they're not going to give you typhus, I don't think.
Mm-hmm.
All right, Mike, Venezuela, I still want to go back to what I said yesterday. I don't think there'll be no invasion. It'll be more like trying to set up like these insurgents, but I just don't. It's fizzled out. It's actually, I mean, it's worked. They had Did you see Christian Amanpour had Guaido, and you normally can tell they're reading off a teleprompter.
Yes.
But you can really tell she was reading off it, and he really, I couldn't even understand him. And like, you know, he mentions the obvious democracy, you know, like, I mean, but it was so fake, you know. I wonder if they're going to replace him with a newer president. You know, here's our newest one, because the old one we tried to put in didn't really work.
Usurper version 2.0.
Yeah.
The golden cut.
Yes, something like that.
But you know, there's people that were in Hugo, I forgot their names, in the Hugo Chavez presidency. Well, they were like one of his economic advisors. They're, you know, this oligarch, you know, that's like, they want to take the oil. They basically want a benefit from the oil given to the U.S. companies. You know, so there's two people that were. But like I said, Mike, the military. We have more people that were trying to overthrow Trump here than Venezuela's got a handful of these ex-military from 10 years ago living in, you know, Colombia. There's more people here. Like the Air Force guy says, I wouldn't give Trump the keys to the new. You know, I mean, we got more people here trying to overthrow Trump.
Well, unfortunately, they're not yet using weapons, but I think Maduro was correct to close that bridge to Colombia because the story that he's blocking humanitarian aid from the U.S. makes no sense. Why would the U.S. be sending humanitarian aid at the same time they're, you know, just hitting all of these sanctions all over the country? Anyway, Dustin, got to let you go. Got to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. Aloha America, welcome back to the show. We're going to go ahead and close the phone lines because both of us are way behind on our talking points. And during the commercial break, we were looking at the crawler on Fox News where the White House is declining to place blame for the Khashoggi murder. So Saudi Arabia got a lot of clout with the Trump administration.
Oh, a lot. Very much.
We also got an email from somebody who appears to be knowledgeable on the subject. Zika is not an airborne disease and cannot be spread by coughing, sneezing, or talking. However, Zika virus has been found in semen, and person-to-person sexual transmission has been documented. So that, this would not be a tool that you would use for a depopulation agenda. So getting on back to your stories, what's next?
Next, we have a couple of unhappy stories. 2 pipelines had to be shut down after 43 barrels of crude were leaking into Missouri soil.
Let me get there. We are.
Okay. And apparently parts of 2 pipelines owned by the controversial Canadian pipeline companies had to stay shut down Thursday, following the discovery of a leak near St. Louis, Missouri on Wednesday. Both TransCanada's Keystone Pipeline and Enbridge's Platte Pipeline run parallel to each other through the area. The Keystone Pipeline carries 590,000 barrels of crude a day from Alberta. And remember when our First Nations people were protesting against this?
Yeah.
Please don't do this to Mother Earth, etc., etc., etc. I think that they were absolutely right.
Well, they were absolutely right. Yeah. And what they were protesting about, which, by the way, under some of these new laws would now be illegal.
Yeah.
Okay. Is the original path of the pipeline had basically stayed off reservation land.
Right.
But that brought it close to a rather large community. Mm-hmm. And that community said, no, we don't want the pipeline because sooner or later they leak. It gets into the water.
Yeah.
So the oil pipeline company just said, well, we're just going to run it through the reservation land. And that's what the First Nations people were upset about. This idea that the oil company just arbitrarily put this pipeline where it threatened their water supply.
Mm-hmm. And you got the statement, until you can excavate and see the top of the lines, you can't really determine which pipeline the release occurred from. Now, that came from TransCanada Public Information Officer Matthew John. Excavation equipment sits near where the Keystone Oil Pipeline
That sounds
runs
like a photo caption.
through northern St. Charles, and the pipeline was shut down after a possible oil leak was detected in St. Charles County on Wednesday. Now, the media are being kept back from the scene by police. Why?
Well, any oil leak is bad press.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And the oil companies don't want that because right now there's a big rush to build new oil pipelines.
Mm-hmm.
And the reality is that none of these pipelines last forever. And like so much of the rest of the nation's infrastructure, they're getting into bad repair.
Mm-hmm.
And leaks are becoming more often. In fact, again, back during that First Nations protest, there was a significant pipeline breach not too far away from them.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And they tried to hush that one up.
The next thing I'd like to look at, and I know that you've been talking about
Yes.
it in other contexts, but apparently there are some very big Canadian corporate interests underlying Canada's support for the coup in Venezuela. And Canada's government has now officially recognized Juan Guaido of the Voluntad Popular Party as the leader of Venezuela. And apparently his violent opposition party and Guaido as the interim president. I mean, what's going on here? Canadian Foreign Minister Chrystia Freeland, remember that name because we're going to come back and talk about her, has expressed support for the ongoing coup in Venezuela. Last week, Canada hosted a summit for the Lima Group to discuss Venezuela's future.
Yeah, and that was the group that basically went on out and basically demanded the rest of the world stop doing business with Venezuela.
Yeah. And it's just mind-boggling, the chutzpah they have in this. And they're trying to pressure Nicolas Maduro into resignation, while at the same time building support for right-wing position leader Guaido. And he has been declared a full member of the Lima Summit Group during the summit. Now, there are a lot of Canadian interests. And this Freeland is a very close friend of Victoria Nuland. Remember her from the Maidan Revolution in 2014 in Ukraine?
I think she's actually down there somewhere right now.
Yeah. And what history, and this is what she says, what history shows is once a leader of an authoritarian regime discovers that there are no alternatives, that is when you see the regime fracturing, and that is when you see democracy restored. What in the heck is this lady talking about? It's no more democratic than me deciding to become the queen. You know, I mean,
that's
it's
exactly
ridiculous.
right. You know, democracy is not somebody standing up and saying, I'm in charge.
Mm-hmm.
Or some other country coming on in and saying, well, we've decided Hillary Clinton is actually the president.
Yeah.
I mean, that's really how absurd this whole thing has become.
Yeah.
You know, Maduro won his election in an election that Jimmy Carter described as one of the most honest, fair, and transparent in the world.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay, we got to take another break for commercials.
All right.
We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And Claire, your next story, please.
Well, this is regarding Venezuela and Maduro. And I will tell you right now, you will not see this in any of the corporate prostitute statements on Venezuela. Apparently, Maduro invoked Vietnam in an open letter, and he warned Americans that such a war would be horrible to send their sons to die for. And it's an open letter to the people of the United States warning that Washington is willing to send their sons and daughters to die in an absurd war. And one of the things you have to know about the Venezuelan people, they have a very strong sense of their history and legitimacy. And the other thing, and I think this is sort of a paraphrase of Sun Tzu, Art of War, if you're going to go to war, you've got to be on the right side of history to make things work in a positive way.
Well,
and with Venezuela, folks, we are absolutely the polar opposite of the right side of history.
Well, actually, what Sun Tzu said was you've got to have the moral law on your side.
Yeah, the moral high ground.
Or at least your soldiers and your civilians who are paying for all of it have to believe the war is just and moral. Our government has already lost that. And, look at the problems we're in. We're mired in Afghanistan. We've got this retired general saying it's time to admit we've lost that one.
Yeah.
We're losing in Syria. I think they're going to try another false flag to re-escalate it. We're still mired in Libya. We're still stuck with that horror show over there in Yemen. And we're all over Africa in places most Americans don't even realize that we're there, like Somalia. We're still bombing Somalia. And this was all supposed to be over, according to General Wesley Clark. This was all supposed to be over by 2008. And here we are, 2019, and we're stuck.
Yeah.
And, the American people have no confidence in the government. They don't trust the government or the corporate media. Americans are war weary, and Maduro is hitting a valid point.
Yeah.
The U.S. does okay in open field desert warfare where they can look a long distance and they can see things. Vietnam taught us we're not very good at jungle warfare. In fact, there were several cases in World War II which illustrated the fact that the United States does not do well in jungle warfare. So he's absolutely right that it would be a new Vietnam. And I think that's why Dustin was saying that he doesn't think there's going to be an outright invasion of Venezuela, but the U.S. is going to go on in and try and find paramilitary groups that they can arm, but there will be special forces and CIA getting involved. But that's how Vietnam started as well.
Yeah,
with the
advisors. Oh, wow.
The advisors went in, and it wasn't going well, so they sent in more advisors and handed the advisors rifles, and 50,000 Americans dead. Actually, I think it was closer to 60,000. So, and we are not equipped to take on another war right now. If you remember that article I was talking about earlier about the final U.S. Navy report on the USS Fitzgerald, our weapons are crumbling.
Yep.
And we don't have the manpower. And if the Pentagon thinks they're going to get all these illegal immigrants to go and fight the United States wars, it is not going to happen.
No.
They actually tried a pilot program, and they had to drop it. It just wasn't working out. These illegal immigrants, these refugees, they don't have an emotional connection to the United States. They're not going to be effective fighters.
Yeah. And Maduro said something that I feel was very cogent at the moment. In this open letter, he says, they want to invade and intervene in Venezuela. They say, as they said then, in the name of democracy and freedom. But it's not like that. The history of usurpation of power in Venezuela is as false as the weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. It is a false case, but it can have dramatic consequences for our entire region.
Well, he's absolutely
Nicolas
right
Maduro.
about that one, because every time the United States goes into somebody else's country, corporate media say, well, we're bringing them freedom and democracy. And we've not actually had a single working democracy come out of any of them. It's always a dictatorship like the Shah of Iran, or Pinochet in Chile, or Marcos in the Philippines. That's what we produce. We produce dictatorships that serve American corporate interests.
Yeah. And also in global research, and by the way, that open letter from Maduro to the American people is available for you to read in English at globalresearch.ca. And I suggest you look at it and, get your reality meters out. See if this guy seems to be talking sense. Because, Mike, to me, he is.
Of course he is.
Yeah.
Of course he is. And what's really kind of odd right now is it's almost like our government and the corporate media already know we're not buying any of this, and they're just sort of going through the motions so they can say, this is the official story, we don't care if you believe it or not, but based on the official story, we're going to do thus and such. It's like when Trump at the State of the Union said he was going to push for more legal immigration because we need those people, our unemployment is very, very low, and and of course he's listening to his own propaganda.
Yeah.
And that's when you make bad choices here.
Absolutely. And this also comes from global research. And apparently the media is having a hard time realizing how these sanctions are affecting individuals, just working guys in Venezuela. They're going to create deeper gasoline shortages. The country's refineries are already operating just at a tiny fraction of their capacity, crippled by a lack of spare parts and crude. And Venezuela only produced a third of the 190,000 barrels of gasoline it consumed a day as of November, according to Ivan Freites, a leader of the country's oil union. And he's saying that this is really going to hurt the working guy. Not just the big guys with a lot of money, but, people like us who work. And apparently, just across the street, there was a group of senior citizens waiting in line to collect their pensions and worrying that Trump administration's actions would further bankrupt their country and deepen the humanitarian crisis that has left so many starving, sick, and without basic services. And one of the ladies who was interviewed said the United States has no business meddling in this. And Ora Ramos, 59, was a retiree, and she's having a hard time affording blood pressure medication. And to all of those who are out there who are on some kind of meds like this, and they're not cheap either. And
well, I don't know how expensive they are in Venezuela. Probably nowhere near what they are here.
Yes, you're probably
but
right.
Again, that's the whole purpose of the economic sanction. And again, you need to remember, the United States has been waging economic war on Venezuela going all the way back to Hugo Chavez. They have been coveting that country for a long time, and now they want to go for it. And of course, corporate media is out there saying that, that economic hardship, it's the failure of socialism, and it's, Venezuela's bad policies. No, Venezuela got economically raped over and over and over and over again. And they're absolutely right. These sanctions are hurting ordinary people. The strategic goal is to get the population angry enough to support an overthrow. And just say, we're willing to take a chance that what's coming on in is going to be better than what we've got now. But again, going back and looking at every single country the United States has done this to in the past, no, what comes in afterwards is always worse.
Yeah, absolutely. And Mike, you and I were having a discussion in the car yesterday when we were running errands. We do that once in a while.
Yep.
And we were talking about the bigger picture of the fight, if you will, inside our government between destroying countries who are growing aggressively, and that it's cheaper to create a war to do that rather than have to retool and learn to compete. I'd like you to kind of address.
That was basically what, and that goes back to one of our earlier callers, where we were talking about Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's New Green Deal. But throughout history, nations have very often had to deal with other nations that compete with them for trade, trade routes, economies. One of the reasons that eastern end of the Mediterranean has been fought over so much throughout history is prior to the invention of ships and airplanes, that was where all the trade between Europe and Asia and Africa had to flow. And so those trade routes were very, very valuable because you had to pay a toll to get through them. And again, war is something the U.S. already knows how to do. And so when you have the U.S. national defense strategy worried about the fact that Russia and China are becoming economically powerful, common sense people, ordinary Americans would say, let's take these trillions of dollars that are being spent on war, let's rebuild our factories, let's develop new technologies and new products so that we are again competitive on the world stage. And then you have people in government and corporations saying, no, we don't want to upset the status quo in this country. You know, the corporations are happy exactly where they are. So the other alternative is we launch a war to destroy those nations that are economic threats to us. And remember, that's how we got into World War I and World War II. World War I began between Austria-Hungary and Serbia, but the target got shifted to Germany. Why? Because Germany had all the best scientists, they had all the best engineers, they were manufacturing like crazy, they were making products that neither the United States nor Great Britain could compete with. And that's why they get targeted for destruction in World War I, then saddled with a private central bank by the Treaty of Versailles.
Yes.
And that kept Germany from being an economic threat to Britain and the United States and France, the rest of Europe, until the Nazis rose to power, at which point they threw out the private central bank, issued a value-based currency that did not accrue interest. Germany's economy exploded, and they started rebuilding their factories. It was called the German Miracle. And in the mid-1930s, when this was all taking place, Winston Churchill, and this was before he was prime minister, he was on the radio all the time saying that if Germany was allowed to go to what he called re-merchandise, in other words, rebuild its manufacturing and export, he said, if Germany was allowed to re-merchandise, we fought World War I in vain. And so that was when the maneuvering to push Germany into doing something that would allow another great war to wreck Germany. And now they're talking about Russia and China in the same context.
Yes, I see. And I would like to talk to all of the parents out there who have kids in high school who are bright, motivated, etc., etc. I think you are within your rights to make sure that if there is a military recruiter at that child's school and campus, that you want to have in place a no contact with. Can they do that, Michael?
No, they can't. Unfortunately, under the No Child Left Behind Act, military recruiters are allowed completely unfettered access to all the children. The parents are not allowed to object.
Whoa, I mean, I'm surprised. Did the Supreme Court actually hear any cases that were attached
I don't think
to
it went up to the Supreme Court here, but what the parents can do is basically tell kids, you know, war is not fun. You can lose important bits of your body. You know, if you really have a kid who's really all that hot to put on a uniform, take them over to the local VA hospital. Let them take a look there. And just remind them, the courts have ruled consistently that promises made by recruiters to get them to sign that contract are not legally enforceable.
Not legally binding.
That recruiter can come up to your kid and promise you're going to be a jet fighter pilot, and the kid spends his entire enlistment repairing helicopter transmissions, which at least keeps him out of gunfire. You can't do anything about that. And, you know, that's, I mean, the attitude of the U.S. government is once you sign that contract, they own you. 13th Amendment be gosh darned.
Yes, I hear you. And, Mike, when do you think the U.S. is going to want to come up with another draft? Because I'm looking at these numbers and the recruitment numbers, and the retention numbers are not good.
They're not very good, and they've already lowered the standards. And, again, in that report from the Navy about the USS Fitzgerald and the John S. McCain, they said the problem was the crews were young, poorly trained, and inexperienced. So I would say that, you know, when a draft is reinstated, that will be the wake-up call, I think, for the American people, the same as it was with Vietnam. Because prior to the draft, most people, Vietnam, not my problem. These kids all enlisted, it was their choice. When it became a draft, that's when opposition to the war really took off, and I think the same thing would happen again. I think our government knows the same thing would happen again, which is why they haven't gone to a draft yet. But if we get into a major war with a military peer, like Russia or China. You know, Europe is heating up. There will be a draft. They'll have to bring back the draft because they just don't have the people. Okay.
Pardon me, I swallowed.
Oh, okay.
Inauspiciously.
All right.
I would like to get back a little bit to Brexit, which should be the end of Prime Minister May, but she keeps resurrecting. I don't know what happens. But what the U.S. attitude is on the Brexit was that in 50 days, if it went through, as you mentioned, President Trump was going to sign all sorts of business deals.
Yeah.
But the problem here, Mike, is that under her plan, Britain is going to remain tied to the EU's regulatory system, and that the consequence is that the barriers to U.S. trade aren't going to go away.
Yeah, I mean, that's been the problem all along.
Yeah.
Theresa May was always a Remainer,
Mhm.
and this checkers plan that she crafted,
Mhm.
it's a giveaway. It's a Brexit in name only.
Mhm.
Okay, you British subjects, you voted for Brexit here. We have now Brexited, but we still have to do what Brussels tells us to do, and we still have to have the open borders.
Mhm.
That's why people are getting rested. That's why Parliament voted the plan down. So Theresa May went to Brussels to try and say, guys, you got to back off on some of these demands.
And they
Brussels said
refused.
absolutely not.
Yeah, yeah.
So we're heading for a no-deal Brexit, and the fear-mongering is just going on. And if the British government fails to deliver a clean, real Brexit,
Mhm.
I think the British people will probably riot. We got to take a break for commercials. We'll be back with the last segment of our program after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. Last segment of our show on this Pauhana Friday here. And Claire, you got an interesting story ready to go.
Oh, yeah. If you are a client of AT&T, T-Mobile, and Sprint, guess what? Drum roll, please. Hundreds of bounty hunters had access to AT&T, T-Mobile, and Sprint customer location data for years. Now, this comes to us from Motherboard Vice. And last month, Motherboard did reveal that AT&T, T-Mobile, and Sprint were selling their customers' real-time location data, which trickled down through a complex network of companies until eventually ending up in the hands of at least one bounty hunter. Motherboard was also able to purchase the real-time location of a T-Mobile phone on the black market from a bounty hunter source for about $300. In response, telecom companies said that, oh, this abuse is a fringe case. Well, not exactly, because apparently, Mike, about 250 bounty hunters and related businesses had access to AT&T, T-Mobile, and Sprint customer location data, with one bail bond firm using the phone location service more than 18,000 times, and others using it thousands or tens of thousands of times, according to internal documents obtained by Motherboard from a company called Circare One, a now defunct location data seller that was operating until 2017. The documents list not only the companies that had access, but specific phone numbers that were pinged by those companies.
Well, I'm shocked. I'm appalled. And Dog the Bounty Hunter would never stoop that low.
I don't know.
I don't know.
Yeah, it's a strange world we live in. All of the access and
Yeah, we're definitely surveilled. There's no personal privacy anymore.
Mhm.
And there have been calls that there needs to be some kind of consumer privacy laws. They're falling on deaf ears.
Of course.
Along with calls to end all these wars.
Yeah.
So, again, it's part of the corporatization of our society, and there's another word for corporatism, and that's called fascism.
Mhm.
And so it's kind of strange to see all these people running around screaming, socialism, 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 where we're actually descending into pure economic fascism.
Mhm.
And we see the symptoms everywhere.
Yeah.
Endless wars on other countries to get their wealth. All of the wealth in our country focused at the very, very top.
Mhm.
And yeah, it's a very evil situation for us to be living in.
Yeah. And I hope if those of you with kids who are in school, take a look at their history books. Take a look at what and how they're being taught about the rise and ascent of the United States of America.
Yeah, I mean, that's something parents should always do anyway, is take a look at those textbooks yourself,
Mhm. Yeah.
Especially after Common Core.
Yes.
There was so much twisting and spinning in there. I remember one example being the Second Amendment, where Common Core said that you had a right to keep and bear arms in a government militia. complete rewrite.
Yeah.
All right, there's the music. Time for us to get on out of here and get something useful done. Stay tuned for John Stedmiller. I'm sure he's got lots and lots of good things to share with you. Please have a really good weekend. Please donate to RBN. Please donate to whatreallyhappened.com.
Yes.
Share what you hear and read with everyone that you know. Have a good, safe weekend. We'll be back Monday. Aloha, America.